Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we, well, dive deep into all those things you're curious about. And today, we're going someplace pretty fascinating, at least I think so, the Day of the Dead.
Always a good time for this topic.
Right. So we got some really interesting research sent in, all about how one region in Mexico, La Huasteca, celebrates in their own unique way.
Yeah, it's a great example of how much diversity you can find within one tradition, like it's not this one monolithic thing you see.
So no sugar skull cliches here.
Well, you might see a few sugar skulls here and there, but trust me, the real story in La Huasteca is way more, how should I say, nuanced. It's like this deep dive is going to show us how those global trends, kind of bump up against the local traditions, and their own celebrations, I mean.
I am intrigued, so let's just jump right into it, shall we?
Yeah.
This article wastes no time, it jumps right in, talking about this cultural tug-of-war happening around La Huasteca's Day of the Dead, or as they call it, Zantolo.
Exactly. And it all comes down to this super interesting concept called transculturation. Basically, it's like, imagine different cultures are always kind of influencing each other, like ingredients in a recipe, right? Sometimes you end up with these unexpected flavors.
Okay, so let's break down this recipe then.
Yeah.
What are the main ingredients, so to speak, that are kind of clashing here?
Well, on the one hand, you've got the super deep-rooted ancient traditions of the Day of the Dead, right? Going way back to pre-Hispanic rituals and all that. And then on the other hand, you've got this, well, it's pretty obvious, the growing global influence of, wait for it, Halloween.
Halloween, okay, that's a culture clash if I ever heard one. But I mean, how does that actually, play out? Are we talking about trick-or-treaters going head-to-head with sugar skulls or something?
Not exactly. Think more along the lines of costumes, commercialization, that whole shebang. The article kind of suggests that the presence of Halloween, especially among the younger generations, it's raising some eyebrows, concerns about whether it's chipping away at those local traditions.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. It's not hard to see how a holiday like Halloween, which is, let's face it, pretty commercially driven, could overshadow something as deeply rooted and, well, meaningful as the Day of the Dead.
But speaking of interesting twists, the article also mentioned this thing called the Miss Simple Oxochitl contest. Is that a Day of the Dead beauty pageant or something?
You got it.
Yeah.
And get this, it's a fascinating example of how La Huasteca is taking something modern, this beauty pageant idea, and using it to push back against those very same modern influences. They're reclaiming their traditions, one sparkly gown at a time.
Okay, I am hooked. Tell me everything. How does a beauty pageant help preserve a tradition as old and as, well, significant as the Day of the Dead? Well, to really get that, we got to understand what makes Zantolo and La Huasteca so unique, right? I mean, yeah, they share those core elements of remembering and honoring the dead, for sure. But their celebration has got this whole different rhythm, a different flavor to it,
Like what? Give me the details. I think the article mentioned building altars.
Yeah.
And not just in homes, but also right on the graves themselves.
Exactly. Families will build these incredibly elaborate altars, they're called ofrendas, and they're just covered in flowers and candles and food, photographs, personal items of the deceased, you name it. It's like creating this welcoming space for the spirits to return and partake in the festivities.
That's incredible. I mean, that sounds so much more, I don't know, personal and welcoming than just visiting a grave.
Yeah.
But the article also mentioned dances and people getting all dressed up in these really interesting costumes. That doesn't exactly sound like, I don't know, somber remembrance, which is kind of what I pictured.
It's not all quiet reflection and all that. Think cowboys, Comanches, even figures that represent death itself. These figures have this really important role in their celebrations, you see. Their presence is meant to distract death.
To distract death. Okay, that's a new one. So it's like a celebration designed to, I don't know, outsmart death itself.
In a way, yeah. It's about celebrating both life and death as part of this continuous cycle. It's they're acknowledging death's presence, but they're not letting it, completely overshadow the joy of remembrance. But it's this balance, this very balance that the people of La Huasteca worry is being lost, with all these outside influences creeping in.
Because of those outside influences, like Halloween we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. And that's where this whole Miss Simple Oxochitl contest comes in. It's this really deliberate effort to push back against those pressures and revitalize interest in their unique cultural heritage.
Okay, I am so ready for this deep dive into the world of Day of the Dead beauty pageants. Hit me with it.
get ready, because it's a lot more than just like glitter and gowns, you know. This contest, it's deeply rooted in history, in symbolism, and in this powerful connection to an ancient civilization you might not expect.
Lay it on me. I am all ears.
Okay, so we're talking ancient civilizations now, huh? This is where it gets really interesting, I think.
Hit me with it. I'm ready for a history lesson.
All right, so the Day of the Dead, right? Like the version we're familiar with. It's this super fascinating mix of indigenous rituals, you know, from way back, and then the Spanish Catholic traditions that came later. See, before the Spanish even showed up in Mexico, the indigenous people, especially the Aztecs, they were already having these like elaborate ceremonies to honor their dead.
So the Day of the Dead, it goes back even further than the Spanish conquest.
Oh yeah, way further back. And get this, for them it wasn't about like mourning or anything. Think celebration. The Aztecs, they saw death as just another part of this like never-ending cycle. They even had a whole month dedicated to honoring kids who had passed, and a separate one for adults.
Wow, a whole month. That's incredible. It seems like their whole outlook on death was just so different from, like, you know, what you usually see in Western cultures, even today.
Totally. And a lot of those ancient beliefs, those ideas about life and death being part of this like ongoing cycle, they're still super present in how people celebrate the Day of the Dead even now, especially in places like La Huasteca.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's
Yeah.
like their traditions are this direct link back to their ancestors, you know, a way to keep those ancient beliefs alive and relevant.
Exactly. But, and this is important to remember, that culture isn't like, you know, set in stone. It's constantly shifting and evolving. When the Spanish showed up back in the 1500s, they brought their own traditions about death, right? All Saints' Day, All Souls' Day, things like that. And over time, those traditions got all mixed up with the indigenous ones, and boom, you've got the Day of the Dead as we know it today.
So the Day of Dead that we see celebrated like all over the world now, it's really this fusion of like different cultures and beliefs all rolled into one.
Bingo. Talk about transculturation in action, right? The date might have come from the Catholic calendar, but that whole vibe of joyous celebration, of welcoming the spirits back, that's pure pre-Hispanic tradition right there.
That's incredible. It really shows you how adaptable traditions can be, you know, how they can change and evolve over time, but still hold on to those core elements. Okay, but let's bring it back to La Huasteca for a sec. How does this whole blending of traditions actually play out in their, you know, unique way of celebrating Xontolao?
It's everywhere. You see it in the food they make, the costumes they wear, everything. Like the article, it really highlights how important tamales are, right? That traditional Mesoamerican dish. They're always on the ofrendas.
It does seem like food plays a huge role in their celebrations, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And every food has a meaning, a reason for being there. Like with tamales, it's all about nourishment, abundance, providing for the spirits on their journey.
Wow, that's fascinating. So it's like every single thing they do, every little detail, it's intentional, carefully chosen to, you know, to honor those who've passed and to like help guide them back home.
You got it. Or take those symbolic flowers, for example. Those bright orange marigolds you always see with Day of the Dead stuff. Well, in La Huasteca, they believe that the smell, that really strong scent, it actually helps to guide the spirits back to their families.
Like a fragrant path leading them home. I love that.
Right. But it goes even deeper than just like the physical stuff. Remember those figures we talked about? The cowboys, Comanches, even Death himself. They're not just there for decoration.
Right. They're there to distract death, which is, I mean, that's kind of a wild concept when you think about it, right? Like
Yeah.
you're using entertainment, even a bit of trickery to deal with death.
Exactly. It just goes to show you how pragmatic a lot of these folk traditions can be. But this whole playful approach to death, that's exactly what some people in La Huasteca are worried about losing, you know, especially with Halloween becoming more and more popular.
Because Halloween tends to be more about the, like, I don't know, the scary, spooky side of death.
Exactly. And it's not that either tradition is like right or wrong. You know, it's just different ways of looking at things. The Day of the Dead, it's all about welcoming the spirits back into the family, even if it's just for one night.
It's a really beautiful way of honoring them, I think.
Absolutely. And the people of La Huasteca, they get that. They really do. And that's where this whole Miss Sampoesto Cuddle contest comes in. It's their way of making sure those traditions don't fade away, you know?
Okay, I think we need to unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah.
You said before that this contest was about way more than just like, you know, the glitz and glamour. What did you mean by that?
Well, to really understand how deep this goes, we gotta dive into the world of ancient Mesoamerican deities, specifically one who's all about knowledge and cycles of life, and you guessed it, death.
Ooh, this is getting good. Tell me more. Okay, so we're talking about ancient Mesoamerican deities now. This is getting deeper by the minute.
Right. And the deity at the heart of it all, it's none other than Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, remember? Knowledge, agriculture, life, death, the whole shebang.
All right. Quetzalcoatl, yeah, he seems to pop up everywhere when you start looking at Mesoamerican cultures. But how does he tie into a beauty pageant?
Well, here's the thing. In La Huasteca, those Miss Semposotional contestants, they aren't just wearing any old gowns. They're costumes. They're like full-on design with imagery and symbols that connect right back to Quetzalcoatl. It's like they're embodying this ancient deity in a modern setting.
Wow. Talk about making a statement. It's like they're braiding together, I don't know, ancient beliefs with modern practices to create something totally unique and new.
Exactly. It's tradition in action, you know? But there's actually like another layer here, a really fascinating connection to a civilization that even predates the Aztecs.
You mean the Toltecs? The article mentioned them, but I wasn't quite sure what their role was in all of this.
Okay, so get this. The people in La Huasteca, they believe they have this direct ancestral link back to the Toltecs. And they believe that the Toltecs, through like their understanding of nature and the cosmos, they cracked the code on life and death, you know, secrets that still show up in their Day of the Dead celebrations even now.
So it's like, by honoring their dead and celebrating Xantelo in this unique way, they're also tapping into this ancient wisdom, this Toltec knowledge. It's like a spiritual connection that goes back centuries.
That's the idea, and it really shows how traditions, they aren't just about remembering the past, right? They're about carrying those insights forward into the present. But there's, believe it or not, one more piece to this whole thing. Something that adds a whole other level of, like, I don't know, complexity, richness to La Huasteca celebration.
Okay, now you've really got me on the edge of my seat. What else is there?
So we've talked about global influences and ancient rituals, even deities, right? But the story of La Huasteca's Day of the Dead, it's also a story of migration and how that impacts their culture and identity.
You mean migration to the United States? The article mentioned that a lot of people from La Huasteca moved there.
Exactly. Starting back in the 60s, a lot of people from that region, they headed to the U.S. looking for, you know, better economic opportunities. And obviously that creates this distance, right? Physically and sometimes even emotionally between families.
Yeah, I bet. Especially during celebrations like the Day of the Dead, where family is like everything. That must be really tough.
Totally. But this is where, like, the power of tradition really shines through. Instead of letting that distance weaken their connection to their heritage, the people of La Huasteca, they found ways to, like, adapt and make it work.
Like the article talked about how people would travel all the way back from the U.S. just for the celebrations.
Exactly. The Day of the Dead became this, like, focal point, you know, a time for families to come together, honor their ancestors, and just reinforce those cultural ties. And on top of that, all those people coming back, it gave a boost to the local economy, too.
It's really amazing. You know, this tradition, which is rooted in these ancient beliefs, it found a way to not just survive, but to thrive, even with all these modern challenges. It's a bridge connecting generations, countries, even life and death, wouldn't you say?
Perfectly said. But it doesn't stop there. See, when people from La Huasteca moved to the U.S., they didn't leave their traditions behind. They took them with them.
Creating those little pockets of cultural exchange we were talking about before, it's like a ripple effect.
Exactly. And that's what's so cool about this whole deep dive, I think. We started with beauty pageants, and then we were talking about feathered serpents. Now it's like migration patterns, right? But the thread that runs through it all, it's this idea of tradition being a living, breathing thing.
Right. It's a great reminder that traditions, they aren't just these like dusty relics from the past. They're dynamic, always evolving.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And as we wrap up our deep dive into La Huasteca's Day of the Dead, I think that's the big takeaway, you know?
It really has been eye-opening, exploring this incredibly rich and complex tradition.
It has. Well, until next time, keep that curiosity alive, right?
Yeah.
Who knows what fascinating things you'll discover.